Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Emily Koski, and I'm the chair of the Budget Committee. I'm going to call to order our regular committee meeting for Monday, September 12th. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Payne.
Present.
Wansley is absent. Brainville.
Present.
Vita.
Present.
Ellison is absent. Osman.
Present.
Goodman is absent. President Jenkins.
Present.
Chavez.
Present.
Chugtai.
Present.
Johnson is absent. Vice President Palmisano.
Present.
Chair Koski.
Present.
There are 9 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Colleagues, today begins the Budget Committee's work on the city's 2023-2024 budget. We have 2 receive and file items today. Item number 1 is our formal receipt of the mayor's 2023-2024 recommended budget, which was referred to us by the City Council. And then item number 2 is the overview of that budget presented to us by the Budget Office. After we dispense with the presentation and discussion, I will lay out our schedule going forward to consider and amend the mayor's budget proposal. But first, I'll invite Amelia Kruver, our city's budget director, to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Chair and members. Welcome to the first budget hearing of the 2023 budget process. I am going to kick us off and start about the agenda we're going to walk through today, but I have some members from my team who will also join me at the podium occasionally. So our agenda for today is to talk a little bit about our budget book online, make sure everyone feels comfortable utilizing that resource. It has a lot of good information in it. We'll talk a little bit about the overall structure of the budget, so high-level changes in spending and revenue, as well as the accomplishment and challenges that have impacted this budget proposal. And then we'll talk specifically about the transparency portal, which is another resource that you can use to do some analysis on your own, as well to share information with constituents and stakeholders. And then we'll talk briefly about the markup process. So starting by talking about the budget book, but before I get into the online budget book, I know we've gotten some questions about when we can get the hard copy printed book. So we have those PDFs ready to go. Right now we need to work on transitioning a giant data file to our friends in the clerk's office, so we'll be reaching out to you guys later today. So with all that, tomorrow should be available for folks that want to print off a hard copy of the budget book. So I just wanted to touch on that before we dove in, because I know we've gotten some questions on that one. The online budget book. So last year we transitioned to a fully online and interactive budget book for our budget documents. Any reader can use the interactive tables. You don't need a special login. We use our transparency portal at the city to host all of the data that we use to power our budget book. So as you are looking through the budget book online, whenever you see a pie chart, bar graph, you should be able to click through and then filter in on that report to zoom in on a specific detail you want more information on, or filter to look at just a specific fund or department. Our financial overview has also been revamped since last year. We've taken a look at the most common questions and really the big headline pieces of information and crafted that financial overview to include all of that information. So that's just a great place to start as you're digging into this information. And then lastly, I just want to say that the budget book represents a huge effort from all of our departments, and so just thank you to everyone that has worked to put that together. We start working on it around March, and it's published in August. And I just also want to note, last year was the first year that we transitioned to an online interactive budget book, and we did receive the Government Finance Officers Association Award for budget presentation. So we're very proud of that work. All right. So just to orient you a little bit more to the information included in that budget book, the first chunk is the financial overview. As I mentioned, that includes a budget in brief. So we didn't previously include a budget in brief in last year's and recent year's budget, but this document should include, like I said, all of the big high-level pieces of information, the frequently asked questions, all the things that we get asked about, we tried to include in that one easily referenceable document. Then there's also information about city spending, city revenues, how those are changing at a high level, as well as city goals and major investments as they align with those city goals. The middle section of the book, if you're looking at the table of contents, is the operating department portion. And so that is where each department includes information about each of their budget programs. So for their program information, we start with pieces of their performance framework. So this is work that each department has done with OPI, who you'll hear from later today, to identify what is your core mission and what are the goals that support that mission. So we start there, and then we include summaries of major services provided and financial information for each budget program in each department. You will also see the new spending proposals, also called change items, in the mayor's budget, mayor's recommended budget. And for each change item, we include a description of what it is buying, is it FTEs, is it contracting, is it materials, as well as an analysis of the race equity impact, as well as expected changes to performance for each new spending proposal in the mayor's recommended budget. You'll also find information about the capital section of our budget. So we have a 6-year capital improvement plan that is included. It mostly addresses our property services department, public works, and the park board. You can also find the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee's report. That's a committee of folks appointed by all of you as well as the mayor to make recommendations each year on our capital spending. So that's in that section of the book as well. And then the last section are our financial schedules. And so this details by fund and by department the spending and revenues expected, and that is a really important part of our legislative documents. We link to those financial schedules in the resolutions that are eventually passed as a part of the budget process. So that's an overview of the budget book and what you're looking at. I will get into talking about our major accomplishments and challenges in this year's budget. So starting off with accomplishments, one thing that we've seen positive data on is our sales tax revenues. So you'll remember sales tax revenues were the most heavily impacted source of revenue at the city in the downturn of 2020. We saw nearly a 40% drop in 2020 of our sales tax revenues, and we have been taking a lot more effort to try and forecast accurately how those are going to rebound. So this year, we have seen some months that have approached pre-pandemic levels, which makes us feel really good. Last year, after we closed out the books, we were about $4 million above our projections, and we look to be on a similar track this year. We don't expect to see a full year that looks like pre-pandemic levels until 2024, but we feel really confident that we are on track to meet those projections. The other accomplishment is just fully deploying and appropriating our American Rescue Plan Act funds. So the city received $271 million from the federal government last year, and we've done work to make sure that those funds are appropriated so they can start to be deployed in the community. We're using about half of those funds to replace lost revenue at the city and bring back some of those programs and positions that were cut in 2020, and the rest have been appropriated to projects impacting the community directly through our special sort of one-off ARPA decision-making processes. Second to last thing I'll talk about is bond rating agencies. So we've continued to see positive and steady ratings from the rating agencies, which reflect our city's financial resilience. In 21 and 22, we saw either improved or steady positive ratings. That's just a real positive sign that we are moving in the right direction. We are also presenting a 2023 budget and a 2024 plan in this year's documents. So I know many of you have noted that, and you will see in the budget book that we have twice as much information as we normally do. So we are presenting 2 years of a budget, and I'll talk a little bit more later on in this presentation about where we go from there. So I want to talk about challenges that are impacting the mayor's budget recommendation. So the city, as many businesses and governments across the country, are experiencing a really tight labor market. This means that we have really high vacancy rates at the city compared to our normal average. This is causing spending to slow and putting a lot of additional stress on staff. We have a new government structure, which is just sort of adding an additional layer of complexity to our usual work in the budget. And we are presenting a few things a little bit differently than it was presented in the 22 budget, and we'll talk specifically about that later on. We are also in the midst of anticipating and implementing a consent decree with the state and federal government that introduces a lot of needs and also a lot of unknowns in terms of what we need to be prepared to support from a budgetary standpoint. We have a strategy to fund this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this presentation as well. And the last challenge is just the trends in property values. So two trends we're seeing is causing additional stress to be felt on some homeowners because of the property tax. One of those is something we've seen in the last couple of years, which is that some of our lower income parts of the city are catching up value-wise with where the rest of the city was. That catch-up is from the last recession we had. So when you see larger growth in your tax value or in your property value, you also see quicker growth in your property taxes. So that is a trend that started several years ago, is continuing in this budget. The other trend is that for the last year and into this year, we've seen steady or slight declines in the commercial values of property in the city. And so when that happens, there is a slight shift of the burden of that property tax onto homeowners. And so that is something that we're seeing this year. Again, it is a slight change. There is only a slight dip in commercial, but any changes really have an impact so that homeowners are feeling more than that 6.5% increase on their property taxes. So those are some of the challenges in this year's budget.
Thank you. Ms. Kruger, quick question. I know that Council President Jenkins has a comment or question.
Thank you, Chair Koski, and thank you, Ms. Kruger. Can you talk about the lowering of taxes for commercial properties? And why may that be happening? 'Cause that's having a significant impact on residential property
Yes.
owners.
Chair Koski and President Jenkins, that's a great question. So the tax is tied to the value. So it is not an intentional decrease in taxes. It is that the property values of some of our commercial buildings are either holding steady or decreasing. And a lot of that has to do with impacts of the pandemic, as well as, impacts of the pandemic. So one of the factors I know that goes into valuation is things like vacancy rates. So where we have higher vacancy rates, where hotels are maybe seeing higher than normal vacancy rates, that impacts their valuation. And so if their valuation goes down, then their taxes also go down because they're linked. And I will also say that the city assessor's office will be presenting a little bit later in the month and can probably go into much more detail than I can, but that's what I know sort of in terms of what impacts that valuation, and then that leads to the lowering of taxes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I am going to transition into spending. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Robert.
Chair Koski, members, the mayor's recommended budget for all city funds is $1.66 billion in 2023, $1.71 billion in 2024. This represents a $60 million or 4% increase into 2023 from the 2022 council-adopted budget of $1.57 billion. This excludes the city's independent boards, and there we're talking about the MBC and the Park Board. We are also excluding from these figures interfund transfers. These amounts are not truly reflective of city spending on services, and so we pull them out of these figures so that we don't overinflate our spending numbers. The chart on this slide shows actual spending in 2020 and in 2021, shows our 2022 adopted budget, and then shows the mayor recommended budget for 2023 and 2024. The chart also shows some clear trends in terms of actual spending and budgeted spending. Most notably, In 2021, we see a dip in spending. This is primarily attributable to two factors. One is related to a decline in spending in our capital program. 2020 was a large spending year for our capital program. We had a lot of costs coming in for our new public service building. Those costs taper off in 2021. 2021, we also see a dip that's attributable to lower personnel spending, and that's associated with our vacancy rates across the city in that year. Going forward into 2022, and then continuing into 2023 and 2024, we see a recovery in spending. As you may recall, this past June, the Budget Office provided a detailed overview of the city's current service level budget. In that presentation, we covered the cost projections for our various staff and programs that were approved on an ongoing basis in last year's budget. The process for developing these costs is defined in our financial policies, and departments and finance really spend the bulk of the budget cycle preparing these current service level cost estimates. We partner up and spend a significant amount of time trying to develop these current service level costs. One note that we wanted to add in here, current service level costs exclude any one-time change items that are not intended to be carried forward. An example of a one-time change item would be the $4 million that was approved this year, 2022, for the gubernatorial elections. Through the budget process, we make sure that those one-time dollars are not carried forward inadvertently into 2023 or 2024. As we presented in June, expenses across all funds are growing at just under 4%, and the drivers for this include modest growth in personnel costs within expectations for our 2023 figures, and inflated moderately for 2024 as well. We see some stronger but largely planned growth in our overhead costs as well. What I'm referring to as overheads here include our costs associated with maintaining our office spaces and operating facilities, our IT costs, costs associated with maintenance and replacement of our fleet of vehicles. These see some standard inflationary increases going into 2023, and we also see some unique one-time items in our budget as well. One would be our HRIS information system, Human Resources Information System. That was budgeted last year, and there was a planned increase going into 2023 that we're seeing helping to keep costs up in the current service level. I should note before moving on, altogether, current service level costs are going up 4%. This is well within the range of what we expected when we were probably giving this presentation at this time last year. On top of the current service level, we have new investments in 2023 and 2024. To identify these new investments, departments submitted change items. These change items included race equity, impact analyses, and expected results for new investments, and these new investments are outlined in the city performance and investments by priority section of the budget book. They're also described in detail in each operating department section, and I should note council will certainly receive presentations from departments in the coming weeks on these change items in some detail as well. Overall, these new investments result in $55 million in, again, new investments across all funds, and $33.6 million of new investments in the general fund in 2023. So this level of new investments, combined with our current service level, gets us to that $1.66 billion 2023 figure that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, and the $1.71 billion that we're seeing in 2024 as well. So if there are no questions at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Justin Carlson, who can certainly provide an overview of our revenues and how those revenues are going to be supporting this level of spending.
Mr. Harrison, hold on one second. We do have one question. I also want to recognize that Councilmember Johnson and Councilmember Ellison have joined us, but we do have a question from Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. How comfortable are you with, you project a less than 4% increase in both labor and energy costs? And are you going to stand by that moving forward?
Yeah, so I should clarify, thank you, Chair, members. I should clarify, for that 4% assumption, that is a number of diverse costs that are being rolled up all together. personnel costs are projected to increase based on the calculations that we were using for our current service level, under 4%. I can recall that very clearly. Energy costs, I don't have that figure. We can certainly provide that. But what we're seeing with that 4% is a result of the work the departments have done to project their overall cost increases going forward. So that 4% doesn't necessarily reflect specifically energy costs only going up 4% or personnel costs only going up 4%. There's also a significant portion of our current service level budget that is held flat every single year because per financial policy, we as a city don't inflate various operating costs for departments, excluding personnel costs and some of our internal service charges. So departments, it's incumbent on them to come forward during the year's budget process and request additional funding if they're seeing certain cost growth in, say, contractual spending or materials and supplies. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Chair Koski, council members, good afternoon. We're going to next talk about revenues. The mayor's recommended budget includes $1.66 billion in revenue in 2023. This includes $1.56 billion in new funds and almost $100 million in use of accumulated fund balances. Total revenues in 2024 are $1.71 billion, which includes $1.65 billion in new revenues and a planned use of around $60 million in accumulated fund balance. There are multiple revenue sources flowing into the city. The largest of these are charges for services and sales and taxes. We've seen improved revenue picture in our forecast with revenues gradually recovering from pre-pandemic levels. We would have seen a much steeper drop in revenues during the pandemic, if not for intergovernmental revenues, which you can see in that light green shaded box. This includes CARES Act funding and other federal funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, phase 1 in 2021. We've seen a much steeper drop and then a more challenging recovery as well, if not for those funds. So we're going to go through a couple of these different areas, starting with property taxes. The mayor recommends a 6.5% increase in the property tax levy in 2023 and a 6.2% increase in 2024. A few highlights from this slide, which council members are likely keenly aware of. A 6.5% increase in the property tax levy does not directly translate to an across-the-board increase in property taxes for all property values of 6.5%. It's a little bit more complicated than that, as Director Kruger explained. If we looked at just a 0% increase in the property tax levy, a residential homestead property owner would still have experienced a property tax increase just due to those shifting estimated market values as residential properties are increasing in value faster than commercial. And our colleagues in the city assessor's office have done an exceptional job putting together a new dashboard and tool for both policymakers to use in decision making, as well as this is a publicly accessible tool, either through our online budget book and the state revenues page, or by going to the state assessor's office website. And it looks at the different property tax impacts based on the levy. So I'm going to click over to that. This is just a screenshot, one view of this dashboard that is interactive using the filters in the upper right. You can search by different property types. Right now we're on a residential homestead property. You can also look at a non-homestead property, duplex, triplex, apartments, commercial, and industrial. The next filter is either citywide, which we're set at right now, or by ward, which may be helpful for you all council members or members of the public to look at the specific ward in which they reside. The last piece is the levy change. So again, I'm set at 6.5%, which is in the mayor's recommended budget in 2023. You can adjust that in 0.5 increments, either up or down. We see based on different estimated market values, the change in estimated market value from 2022 to 2023, and then the proposed tax change and the percent over 2022 in there as well. On the left-hand side, we see a breakdown of the city at large and then by ward to see relative impacts, as you see in North Minneapolis, specifically wards 4 and 5, and then portions of South Minneapolis as well, experiencing different changes in estimated market value than the rest of the city. The final piece of this dashboard is a number of parcels, and the relative change based on your view. You can see that there as well. So again, it's an interactive dashboard, extremely helpful, and the city assessor's office team did a great job putting this together. I will note that these are estimates, as was noted on the previous slide, so some of the factors that go into these calculations are not yet final, but will be finalized over the upcoming months. This slide's pretty straightforward. what are my property taxes going to pay for? So property taxes support many basic government functions. This is a breakdown of how property tax dollars will be spent as proposed in the mayor's recommended budget. We're looking at a median value Minneapolis home, which is increased in value by about 9.2% from 2022 to 2023. Taxes of $1,835, this would be a breakdown in government services, the largest of which we're seeing is general government service, police, and parks. And the final slide on property taxes, the property tax levy has several different components in it. This table shows those components with the overall increase of 6.5% in 2023 and 6.2% in 2024 at the bottom of the table. As we look at the various components, the first being the general fund, which funds basic city operations, this is seeing a faster increase than the overall increase at 9.3% in 2023 and 7.2% in 2024. That above average increase is offset by other components of the property tax levy that you can see below. For the park board, looking at slightly higher than average increase that is due to expanded youth services as well as enhanced safety and staff at new parks that are coming online. The next is the bond redemption and permanent improvement fund. These support our capital program, and the growth that we see there is in line with expectations. The next are pensions and Teachers Retirement Association. Collectively, we see a reduction by about 3.5 million overall in these levies. This is not a change in the obligation of these levies, so I just want to stress that it's not from a change in obligation, instead it's from a use of fund balance. Those are pass-through accounts that have accumulated a significant fund balance, so this is a spend down of some of that fund balance that just isn't needed in those accounts. NBC and BET, we see a slight drop as well in 2023. Similar reason is to use some of the fund balance. Those will then restore to normal levels in 2024. Overall, the increase in 2023 is 1.5%, and 2024 is 1% over last year's 5-year financial direction. Some of that is just restoring expenses to pre-pandemic levels. Next, we're going to talk about sales tax, and I'll pass it back to Amelia.
Okay, this is a slide that you all saw when we last presented to you at the end of June, but I figured I'd call it up because this is always a hot topic. This shows our sales taxes. As I mentioned before, this was our most heavily impacted source of revenue at the city in 2020. So you can see that steep declines in 2020 and into 21, followed by a rebound in 22 moving forward. You can see that we are expecting to return to pre-pandemic levels in 2024. The reason those bars, the 2019 bar and the 2024 bar aren't exactly the same is that this is reflecting the net sales tax, not the gross. So in 2022 and beyond, the state is withholding around $25 million as part of financing for the US Bank Stadium. In 2020, the city received those funds and was using about the same amount to pay down our debt on the convention center. So in terms of the amount of revenues that we have that we are using on operations, we are expecting that to rebound in 2024. The reason it doesn't look like that on this graph is because the state is withholding that amount as part of the deal to finance the US Bank Stadium. You can see that we're seeing progress made in the 23 budget, but don't expect a full year of revenues at the level before the pandemic till 2024. The last slide that I want to touch on again, the local government aid that the city receives. So the tax levy is the largest source of revenue to the general fund. After the property tax levy, LGA is the largest single source of revenue into the city's general fund. We saw a nearly $4 million decrease in our LGA in 2023 and 24. I want to draw your attention to the 21 and 22 levels in this graph. You can see it was held harmless between 21 and 22. This was a result of legislation at the state to hold the city of Minneapolis and other larger cities around the state harmless and not allow for a drop in LGA. A similar bill was included in the legislation that was set to move at the end of the legislative session this year, but didn't make it across the finish line. So we are hopeful that should a special session be called, or next year when they get back to work, that potentially a hold harmless provision could be included. But that did not happen at the end of the last legislative session, and that has resulted in a, like I said, nearly $4 million drop in our revenues. As you'll, when we look at our 5-year financial direction, you'll note that the levy increase planned for 23 and 24 is 1.5 percentage points above last year's estimates for this year. About a 1 percentage point is accountable to this drop in LGA aid. 5-year financial direction. So this is a slide we talked about a lot last year. This graphic helps us to understand and ensure that we are using the one-time resources from the federal government wisely in our 5-year financial picture. So to walk you through what this slide is showing you, the yellow and the blue bars are our own sources of revenue in the general fund. So the yellow is the tax levy, and then blue are all other revenues into the general fund. The other side of the equation, you see a gray bar. That is our current service level budget. So that is all of the people and the programs approved by last council in the 22 council adopted budget pushed forward. The black bar on top of the gray shows our new investments. So new investments in the mayor's recommendation for 23 and beyond. And when you're looking to line up revenues and spending, you'll see that the green bar on the revenue side is really making up the difference so that we are balancing our revenues and expenditures. That green shows our use of American Rescue Plan Act funds to supplement lost revenue. So in doing so, we want to make sure that by the time we get to 2025, which is sort of right in the middle of this graph, we don't use any of those American Rescue Plan Acts. There's no green bar, but we are able to support this planned spending without that need for federal aid and without a large increase in the property tax levy. So this is a slide we talked through last year. I wanted to show the updated version this year so you can see how we are using that revenue replacement to create a stable, consistent plan for our property taxpayers. All right, so the next topic I just wanted to talk about is the government structure and how it's impacting the presentation of the budget. There are a couple places where the 2022 adopted budget is different than what you'll see in the mayor's recommended 23-24 budget. So the first of which is the Office of Violence Prevention. In the 22 budget, it is presented as a division of the Health Department. In the 23-24 mayor's recommendation, it is its own standalone department, the Department of Neighborhood Safety, as a part of the larger Office of Community Safety. The next one is the Department of Race Equity, which was a division, or currently, I guess, in 2022, is a division in the City Coordinator's Office. In 23, it will be a standalone department, Race Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. The City Coordinator Admin Department, so just the City Coordinator's Department, not the larger umbrella office, is getting a new name. It will be called the Office of Public Service in the 2023-24 Mayor's recommended budget. Internal audit, similarly, will be called the City Auditor in the Legislative Department, with the internal audit function being tucked up into that new, broader Legislative Department. Arts and Cultural Affairs, previously a division of the City Coordinator, now a standalone Arts and Cultural Affairs Department in the 23-24 Mayor's recommendation. The Service Center was previously a division of the City Coordinator. That is being merged with the 311 Department. And then Sustainability, previously a division within the City Coordinator's Office. Now that will be presented in the 23-24 budget as a division within the Department of Health. I will say that all of these departments are going to be presented, their budget information, at the department level and not as a part of the larger offices of public service and community safety. We will still be presenting financial information at the department level in this budget book. The next topic I want to discuss is the consent decree, planning effectively for the consent decree. So as I mentioned a few slides ago, we know that sometime, or we expect sometime within the next 12 months, that we will be entering into a consent decree with the Federal Department of Justice as well as the State Department of Human Rights. There are several buckets of costs that we know we should plan to be ready to spend to faithfully implement the consent decree. The first is planning. And so we will need a team of legal analysts, of project managers, and of data specialists to work with in the planning phase our partners in the state and federal government. And because this is an urgent need now, as well as something that will continue through the next several years, there's a plan to redirect some resources that are already appropriated in the 2022 budget to support that work in the current year so that we can be ready to hit the ground running in the next year. The second bucket of expenses is around what I would call discretionary reforms. So we've already received the report from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, and there are some clear next steps laid out in that work. The mayor has included about $8.4 million in public safety change items in his recommendations. These are things that are good proposals to reform public safety, but aren't necessarily tied to specific recommendations coming from a consent decree. So in other words, these are a good idea regardless of whether they show up in a binding legal contract or not. These are the things that you'll see in the mayor's recommended budget that you will have the chance to amend and adopt. The last bucket of costs associated with the consent decree I would call mandated reforms. When we have a document in front of us, the actual consent decree, there will be very specific actions, data systems, processes that will need to be implemented. And we have set aside $2 million in '23 and $3 million in 2024 that is reserved to be used to address those very specific mandates contained in the consent decree. So these are sort of the three big buckets that we're expecting in terms of costs and how we're planning for them in the 23-24 budget.
Director Krueger, quick question here from Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was just curious if this, the $2 million and $3 million reserved for the mandated reforms, is that based on conversations that are unfolding in negotiations, or is this largely just a guess? And if it's a guess, what would be the process for amending those dollar amounts once we do have more specific contract terms?
Excellent question, Chair Koski and Councilmember Payne. So to be clear, I'm not a part of any negotiations, so these are the latter, an educated guess. They're based on some of the things that we know will be an immediate cost, like the cost of a monitor. We expect that to be around $1 million a year. And so for the first year, since we don't know a date, it seems unlikely that January 1st will be when those costs will kick in. A half year of expenses, $2 million felt like a conservative amount that would help us get a monitor under contract and do any urgent needs. We are utilizing a memo from the chief financial officer to reserve these funds. So we're reserving funds that we have in our general fund balance rather than adding them to the levy. So amending them up, I think, would look like communications with the chief financial officer, Dushani Dai. And so I think as we get actual costs in front of us, we will be able to allocate funds. If we reach the maximum, we can come back and have conversations about utilizing additional reserves, utilizing contingency funds, which we also have over $6 million of contingency funds in this budget. And then at that point, I think we would need to come back and have a larger conversation with council. But I think given that it's unlikely we'll have a full year of costs next year, that's kind of how we landed on that $2 million mark.
Thank you. We have one more question from
great.
President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is less of a question for Ms. Krueger, but just I have been in some of those conversations around the enforceable decree or enforceable agreement with MDHR, as well as thinking about what may be expenses in a consent decree environment. And I would say it's less of a guess. You know, the city attorney's office has contacted other cities that are planning or in the midst of consent decrees, and the amount that they are expending to satisfy those mandates. And I would likely say these are very conservative numbers based on some of the reports that we've been getting back. But as Ms. Kruger stated, it's pretty much based on the fact that we probably won't have a full year in 2023. But the ongoing expenses, unfortunately, are going to be pretty significant.
Thank you, Chair Koski and Council President Jenkins. Yes, I think that is a really important addition. We have been involved in discussions with many cities that are wrapping up their consent decrees or still in the process. I've been on the phone with folks in Seattle talking about their budgetary impacts. So it is a very informed guess, still kind of a guess at this point. What I will say is we are also increasing capacity where we know we're going to need it just through this budget. So we're included in this budget and in last year's budget is investments in our HR systems, the HRIS phased in proposals. Those will be really beneficial just in terms of connecting the data sets that we have at the city and personnel information. We know that data analysis tends to be one of the highest costs that cities see. So I think some of our continued investments in just a well-functioning city will also help contribute towards being prepared for implementing the consent decree. Great. All right, so preparing a 2-year budget. So you have heard the mayor discuss in his budget presentation, as well as in the budget documents you have in front of you, we are showing a mayor's recommended 23 budget as well as a 2024 plan. And so this is really driven by a lot of that multi-year work we've done in the last 2 years. The chart that we just discussed, when we hit the financial struggles of 2020 and 2021, and then had an influx of one-time funding from the federal government, we knew we really needed to be serious about multi-year budgeting. So we have started last year in really thinking through what a 5-year direction looks like. This year, we're taking that one step further and showing every bit of our budget at a 2-year level, so the 23 as well as the 2024 plan. A few years ago, many of you were on council and may remember that there was an attempt to change the charter to truly change this to a 2-year budget system where council would vote once every 2 years on the budget. That did not pass. So that is not the tact that we are taking this time around. What this is doing is saying, this is the mayor's recommended budget for 23. This is his plan for 2024. The mayor will still recommend a budget next year. The plan is to just pick up the 24 plan that's a part of this year's work, and that is the starting point for next year's budget. BET will still vote on the max levy. You all will still get a chance to amend and adopt the budget in 2024. The difference is there won't be a larger budget process where we're starting from scratch, looking at city priorities and doing sort of the really in-depth work that we do each year right now. We'll start from the plan that we have as a part of this year's work and move on from there. We will also be updating our revenue assessments to make sure that those revenue projections are still looking good. But the idea is that the budget process will be less intensive next year to allow for more focus on things like deep dives into city performance, management, and analysis of some of those base budgets. The next 2-year cycle will begin in 2024 and will cover 2025 to 2026. I think there is certainly a path forward that could include making a change to the city charter and saying we're going to vote once every 2 years. We can take that up this year, or we can take that up at the next 2-year budget cycle. I think the idea was we have the information. We are doing that detailed multi-year planning to make sure that we have a strong path to recovery. We want to make that transparent and open and start this 2-year process right away by showing what the 24 looks like in the mayor's recommended budget. So those are my highlights on the 2-year budget process. That I will transition to Jane to talk a little bit more about some of the other tools available to you to do some analysis and sharing of budget information.
Good afternoon, Chair Koski, council members. Just take a few moments to talk about the transparency site that we've already touched on a bit. This will be familiar territory for many of you, but we've certainly seen more use of the transparency site by the public and also by the media, so I wanted to take a few moments to talk about it. This is a tool we've had for several years, but integrating it into the budget book has made it much more a part of our daily work. So this is a screenshot from the transparency portal of a frequently asked question that we get. You could do this kind of analysis with any department or any spending category, but this takes a look at the past spending and the future plan for MPD's overtime. So how did I get here? First of all, the transparency site is readily available on the budget page of the city website. You can also just Google Transparency Minneapolis and you'll get right there. Once you open it up, it can look a little intimidating because there's many reports and many different saved views. But in this case, where we're trying to understand the past trends and the future plan, I pulled a report that we're using for a lot of the budget book data. So this is the 2023 Mayor's Recommended Financials by Department report. And then finally, we filter down. You can pick a department, you can pick a spending category or a specific spending code. You could show multiple departments together, depending on the kind of question that you're trying to answer. And once you get to a view that helps answer your question, it's very easy to share this, perhaps with a constituent. You can just simply copy and paste the URL into an email. You can also download this as an image file or as a Excel data file. So we hope this is helpful for you all as you're answering your own questions or maybe trying to come up with more complex questions. Okay, and finally, just to wrap us up, talk a little bit about the markup process, what our role is during that time, and then some key deadlines for everyone. So the budget office throughout the year serves as an information hub for the city, and especially during this time where we're trying to understand the impacts of all of your proposed changes to the mayor's recommended budget. So our goal always is to be able to clearly explain those changes to the public via the budget book. And so as you're having questions about the impact or the implementation of any proposed changes, we just want to make clear that we do work with departments, our partners throughout the city to understand those programmatic impacts. They are the experts on their programs. We can certainly report quickly and easily on financial data, but if you have questions on, say, what the impact of a $50,000 change to diversion programs would be, I would then be going to talk to the city attorney's office to understand that change and what it would mean on the ground. So we all work together to present this information. And then finally, the key deadline for final draft amendments is November 23rd, end of day, and we're hoping that council members are checking in with Budget Director Kruver in the first weeks of November to understand those proposed budget amendments. Our goal, again, is to make sure that the language is clear, we've avoided drafting errors, and inadvertent conflicts between other amendments that are in progress. So we're recommending folks schedule those conversations the week prior to that deadline, though you can certainly get started earlier. And then on this slide, there are just some sample questions that you might want to think about as you're working to prepare those amendments. And with that, I think that concludes our team's remarks, so I'm sure we're all happy to stand for questions.
Any questions from my colleagues? All right. not seeing anything right now, so I know we have a few more items up as well, so we'll let you guys continue to move.
Thank you, Chair Koski. I believe next on the docket is a presentation from the Office of Performance and Innovation to discuss their performance work at the city. I'm trying very. I will hand off.
My presentation. I sent it earlier, so. If not. I have a jump drive, so I'm sorry. I can always use a backup. I was just up checking.
Oh, the joke goes right in the side.
Goes right in, yeah.
Sorry about the little delay.
No problem.
Shall we begin?
Please, go ahead.
Council Chair, Budget Committee, Jonathan Williams Kenzel, Office of Performance Innovation, here to give you all an update about Minneapolis performance management, our efforts to date. So I'm gonna give you a little background. Performance reporting has gone through several iterations over the years. Like other public organizations in the 2000s, Minneapolis adopted the results model. Results Minneapolis was intended to use performance metrics to assess the city department's progress on its business plans. The annual performance reports were designed to articulate current priorities, discuss successes, identify challenges and opportunities to address over the year. Reports were prepared during the first quarter of the year and made available to the public, with progress conferences facilitated by the city coordinator's office scheduled throughout the year to allow departments to discuss their past year's performance with elected officials. In 2019, the Office of Performance and Innovations was established and tasked with managing Results Minneapolis, a Bloomberg innovation team at our heart, and its roots in the response to a Johns Hopkins audit of Results Minneapolis program in 2017. OPI realized it inherited several key issues with the Results Minneapolis program and the metrics used to report department performance. Departments weren't measuring what mattered, first of all. We were counting widgets. There was not much clarity on how or why existing measures were developed, and no clear process for expectations around how, why, or when those measures should change, making it difficult to assess trends and patterns over time. More importantly, staff didn't see themselves or what their programs do represented in the results reports. Results was a standalone process and nothing more than a box-checking exercise. As a consequence, staff were dissatisfied and disillusioned with performance reporting. Results became largely performative, failing to provide meaningful information, decision-making for divisions, departments, or elected officials. What changes did we make? The first step to improving performance reporting was addressing staff frustrations. To do that, departments needed to own their metrics. However, we couldn't just tell them to give us the metrics that they wanted to report. We needed a structured way to guide staff in the selection of metrics. So we designed and tested a new curriculum to help staff develop new performance metrics. The metric selection curriculum developed by the Office of Performance Innovation helps staff at the division or program budget level develop metrics in a rigorous and practical manner, encourage collaboration between performance management staff, division directors, and department analysts, rather than solely leadership who aren't familiar with the intricacies of the work that is essential for developing sound measurement. Clearly defining reporting criteria for all staff so that reporting is standardized across divisions as much as possible, practical, and staff know what is expected of them. Connecting performance measures to larger organizational goals so divisions see themselves as unsiloed players in driving citywide priorities and synergy can be more easily identified. We also built in room for more qualitative context. Metrics are appropriately interpreted by decision makers. Divisions across the city have varying capacities for this kind of work. We aim to develop a curriculum to meet staff where they are at. The performance framework is the final deliverable in the metric selection process, the example you can see on the screen. The performance framework summarizes all the work of a budget program area is designed to achieve. It talks about the mission, vision, values, and goals of that program area, its objectives, the metrics that measure against those objectives, and how that objective ultimately ties to citywide strategic goals. Here's an example from emergency management. Participation in last year's metro selection process was more than what we could have expected. The end of the metro selection workshops overlapped with the end of the 2021 budget process, so staff were busy. But enterprise staff throughout stuck it out and committed to this work and created sound metrics. Some departments even used the performance frameworks to guide their budget presentations last year to council and will do so again this year. So again, we felt that it was a testament to what we created, something of value that staff were eager and immediately ready to implement into the work and into major decision-making. Now we're going to talk a little about the future state. Minneapolis performance management. The end state of the city coordinators staff have long desired is a high-level example of performance management that you see here. My predecessors in the city coordinator's office sought to develop an integrated management strategy focused on aligning strategic planning, business and resource allocation, performance monitoring, learning, and improvement. The next step in our work is creating a new performance reporting model. So we're going to transition from department reporting to strategic reporting. What does that mean? Well, to achieve this, we ended a long decade practice of reporting performance by department with the goal of transitioning to strategic reporting. Results Minneapolis, the department performance reporting model that we're in until 2020 focused only on the work of individual departments. For example, many of our city's departments impact housing in Minneapolis in specific ways. In department results reports, each department reporting on individual aspects of housing that it influences. The example you see here is CPED, regulatory service, and health, all impacting housing in a different way, all providing you all individualized reports. What we ultimately like to transition to is strategic performance reporting that focuses on city's progress towards achieving goals and how the work of departments intersect. By focusing on big topics like housing equality and affordability, we can explore the ways the work of the city departments intersects in the processes of achieving city goals. This approach breaks silos between departments, creating opportunities for examining our overall city impact. While this would be an advancement in performance reporting for the enterprise, it is only a starting point. These efforts made by the Office of Performance Innovation and our past predecessors to get this work to this point provides no real value in efforts to just stop at performance reporting. So performance reporting cannot be the end of our work. It is only the beginning. To encourage leadership and elected officials to base their decision-making and behaviors on outcome-oriented goals, the enterprise should I can't pronounce that word today, inextricably bind performance metrics to ongoing management processes such as the city budget, strategic planning, department business planning, and other enterprise management systems. With support by those functions such as continuous improvement, program evaluation, policy and research, to make certain that we are not just reviewing enterprise performance, but actually assessing and learning and striving to meet the needs of our residents. All right. So what's next? Well, exploring and launching a new performance reporting structure in 2023 and developing a performance management system is a goal of OPI. But several objectives will need to be accomplished. Mainly how to prepare back and front end performance reporting to ensure divisions are ready to report and leadership can leverage data in decision making. Requiring that departments have data collection capacities, new data collection modalities, and the infrastructure to report their performance. To achieve this, we need support from departments with data science roles or data analytic roles and information technology, as not every department has the same level of analytical capacities. We have a number of inequities in that area. We also need to set the stage for meaningful performance discussions. Departments created performance metrics and tied them to city goals. With the help and commitment of elected officials, meaningful discussion platforms for exploration, explanation, interrogation, and evaluation of city performance can be achieved. Efforts in this area should include developing guidance for departments and elected officials on reporting processes, data collection and analysis, report generation, and engagement. Another need is for OPI, the Budget Office, and the Office of Race, Equity, and Belonging to partner in an integrating performance frameworks into their management systems so that we can move from performance reporting and not just, so we can move from performance management, not just performance reporting, and that box checking exercise that we've had in previous iterations. We've heard from the budget director, and you've heard from our director today, that their office is striving to find meaningful ways to include performance frameworks and to use established funding so that there is not an overemphasis on the reporting process and change item requests. And so we're hoping that with the help of our performance frameworks and continued partnership that we'll be able to do more work around integrating performance metrics into the budget process. Finally, OPI doesn't want to be the gatekeepers of this work. We want to make sure that the performance frameworks and future performance management program is accessible as possible. We need and want staff to self-lead this work. The more staff can integrate their performance frameworks into their internal management systems and processes, the more the enterprise shifts from performance reporting to actually performance management. We have some challenges before we move forward. For performance reporting to proceed in 2023 and to ensure performance reporting is meaningful, there needs to be clarity in several areas. The city's proposed governance structure has resulted in many departmental changes. Performance frameworks will need to be reviewed and created when departments have the capacity to focus on the selection of new metrics. Furthermore, the functions of the coordinator's office under management planning are proposed to be moved or repurposed in 2023. Management planning was designed to support informed evidence-based decision-making, identifying innovative solutions, and incubating initiatives to maturity. With uncertainty, performance reporting in 2023 and the development of an operation performance management system is challenging. Also, SREP is due to expire at the end of this year, leaving questions about the ability for the enterprise to transition to a strategic reporting model in the next year. This is where we're at today in progress. I hope this information is helpful as you all continue to make decisions. I wish you best of luck in your budget process.
Thank you, Mr. Williams-Ginsel. Want to open up the floor to any questions to my colleagues. I see Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really want to first start by saying thank you for all this work in the presentation. I thought this was really helpful. I'm excited to see this. I remember going back to talking with Spencer Cronk, however many city coordinators ago that was, about trying to revamp all of our performance metrics. I mean, it seems like, frankly, especially public-facing side, there's been quite a large step back in terms of the transparency around that. If you go back to the R.T. Ryback administration, there were Results Minneapolis website or portal that listed every department and had annual reports, and we're just not in that place right now. So it's exciting to see this work and to see, especially the public-facing side for 2023. I guess I'm curious maybe for your interpretation as you're working with departments. Obviously, there's one thing around kind of these official presentations and public-facing metrics, but there's this whole other side of how performance metrics are used to manage the day-to-day work. You know, in the private sector, at least at my former employers, that was something that was so standard, so important, so integral to leadership and management. Are you seeing metrics used that way? And not to name any departments or anything like that, but I guess I'm trying to process and understand the assessment of how much are we using data to drive the work within the enterprise?
Well, good question. So, I mean, at the administrative level, it all varies on department's capacity to be able to use evidence-based or data-informed decisions. Some departments that have more resources are very well supported, have the ability to do that kind of work and have more informed decisions. Other divisions of departments that don't struggle with that and struggle to have that support. Our office doesn't have the full capacity to be able to provide that. We'd have to build that out as well as departments need the ability to build that out for themselves. It's a place that ultimately I believe has kind of been left to the wayside and needs the investment properly to help make decisions and focus on telling the quality work that you all are doing and help you all make quality decisions, to be able to evaluate those decisions, to be able to learn or pursue other opportunities to test things, ultimately means that we need to really develop our bench when it comes to data analytics work, performance work ultimately, and we're just not there yet.
Do you see thank you, that's really helpful. Do you see what's your view, I guess, on the level of interest and desire? Is it pretty across the board that department leaders, even if they don't have that capacity and don't have that more formalized support, that they really want to embrace data to drive decisions? Or do you even see an opportunity there on kind of the, for lack of a better word, maybe data competency and how it relates to the day-to-day operations and managing the departments or teams even?
I wholeheartedly believe that departments have very much interest in actually having strong performance-based administration of their programs. Ultimately, they just need the structure and support, and they need a platform that supports that. And so ultimately, it's a all-together system approach around this work, and that will require considerable conversation between Amelia and our team, race and equity as they hold SREAP, and then begin on their next iterations of strategic planning, and also you all, and being able to set up those type of conversations that incentivize this type of work. I always say that our staff throughout the enterprise will meet the mark as long as they have the structure and platforms in place. We have not developed them yet to be successful in that area. So if you all help me or help our teams to be able to set up those platforms for good conversations around discussions and be able to use our performance frameworks appropriately to talk about metrics and performance, they will all meet the mark. They're ready for it ultimately.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. And then I guess my last question, and I appreciate that aspect of it. So it sounds like folks are really ready and eager, and they just the tools might not necessarily be there in order to actually utilize it. But you're seeing that pretty much across the board and within, especially even at team levels within departments. It sounds like, if that's correct.
Yeah, Portable Water, they're doing amazing work. They developed their own strategic plan. They use it along the metric selection process. They're able to develop their metrics to also inform their own individual strategic plan. That is a great example of great work that's happening in the city. How do we get that great work to translate into helping you all see that great work and talking about it in the community and also to make decisions on it? That's the next step. That's the hardest process. And it's trying to align these systems to be able to do it appropriately is one of the larger difficult pools of an organization this size.
Thank you. And then my last question is really, when you look at all the different IT platforms for departments to do their work, there's a lot of systems, a lot of big systems. Mm-hmm. How many of them, or what's your assessment on the capabilities of, analytics data right out of the box for a lot of that? Because a lot of it, when we're talking about portals, there's aggregation level work that occurs, but are you finding that those tools exist today, or is this a lot of when I was in IT, ETL of exporting, transforming, and loading in order to create these aggregate tables and such.
Yep, so the IT department has Cognos analytic systems. It's a strong system, and they've slowly been working with departments throughout the years to input data in. I think we're in a good position now because we have the quality data that we actually want to talk about when it comes to performance to actually push that data into Cognos itself. Also, the budget office a couple years ago picked up a new software program. What's the name of the software program? OpenGov, which does data visualization. So you all saw some of the examples today as well. So we'll be able to talk about how to visualize that. But having the people in the right places, those data scientists, those data analytics professionals to really talk and work with departments, to consult with them about how to best tell their story of work through data, is someplace that we're still struggling with as an organization. So we have the people prepared, we have the investment in the system. What's the next step? Staffing appropriately to have that type of work, professional work, to be able to visualize and have really meaningful conversations, a deeper dive about how we're actually performing, to be able to actually evaluate and have support with departments and staff to be able to help them do that work, educate them to do that work so that they become stronger independently in doing that work as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have some questions from Council President Jenkins.
Oh, you still like, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, you've got a few, you got a line up here.
I'm ready to go, but all right. I'm here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, sir, for your presentation. I'm just curious, you talked about sort of shifting, measuring departmental goals to align those goals with the broader strategic or
Yes.
SREAP goals, I would imagine.
Correct.
And I'm just curious, how do we think that, how would that impact the daily work? Like, will departments sort of work towards just addressing those SREAP goals? And how will that impact the rest, not all of the work that Public Works does, for example,
Yes.
impacts SREAP goals? So would they, if they're sort of building towards accomplishing those three, that's kind of how we've set SREAP up at this point.
Yep.
Will they, how will we sort of
Yep.
analyze and set goals for other activities?
So, Council President Jenkins, was a good question. So, ultimately, this past model that we're in was a very silo approach of a work when it came to performance reporting. We have departments that do great work, that collaborate, but we don't tell a holistic story. So bringing that story together about how we're performing and striving to achieve the goals that you all as elected body set is very important. Sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle when you're only focused on what a department is reporting on. There still will be places for departments to be able to report, to advocate for the resources and work they do. I think that'll be well seen in budget presentations going forward. But when it comes down to focusing on performance, we really want to talk at a high level on saying these are the goals that you all set as elected body. These are the priorities you set. This is what departments are doing to strive to meet those goals and areas. And then where are we identifying our opportunities and challenges? Where are we identifying places where we need to evaluate, where we need to learn, where we need to use our innovation tools and really explore what are we doing in a certain area to actually meet the needs of a certain customer group or a certain resident group ultimately. And so there is place for both of them ultimately, but one really strives to make sure that we're driving towards what we say we want to achieve. If we say we want to improve public safety in our community and our organization, we want to be able to look at all of our public safety efforts and understand where we're doing well at, where do we need to improve, where do we need to provide additional resources ultimately. And if we do that in a very siloed approach, it makes it a little bit more difficult to then have those then transition conversations to where do we need to put money at in what departments and what programs ultimately.
Mm-hmm. And then just follow up, you know that the SREAP expires
Correct.
this year.
Yes.
Do we have plans or thoughts of a new strategic process or?
So that is above my pay grade. as I like to say. I'm sure there will be conversations about that ultimately. I think that your predecessors put you in a prime decision with a quality strategic plan. No strategic plan has ever been developed in the city like the one that was done by your predecessing council, where we were able to talk about goals in an objective and measurable way, and it allowed us to really create work to talk about metrics and develop metrics that line up with those goal areas that you all talked about, to have concrete discussions. And so you have a great foundation. It's what's the next step in what do you all want to do with it? And I think there's options, and those options probably are being discussed. Amelia may be able to talk a little bit more about what those are. I don't know yet. I'm sorry if I threw you out there under the bus. But you have opportunities and options. I'm sure offline, some of them will be discussed with you all going forward.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Council Vice President Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Williams-Kinzel, I really appreciate the focus on outcomes, right, instead of department by department programming. I think that is important to what we're all here to try to achieve. Can you help us understand how long have we been retooling this function, right? On one hand, it should be in a state of constant improvement. But what are we doing during this time to make sure that we do continue to have data to make sound decisions?
Okay. Yes. So, as you know, formerly Results Minneapolis, almost a 2-decade-old performance reporting program. So performance reporting programs are in a constant state of iteration and improvement, looking for ways to improve different back ends of performance reporting ultimately, and to improve the platforms in which performance is actually discussed in. We saw the frustration staff had with performance reporting. The metrics didn't reflect the work that they did, so we had to make a stop and really look back and talk about, okay, what is the process of reforming performance? And that first step was to really focus with departments on talking about what they do and what it takes to do that work, and what indicators show they're being successful in that work. And so we took a year-long process. It was myself and a colleague of mine, Colleen Pulaski. She's no longer with the city, but she's one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. We sat down well over a year. In 4 months, the two of us, with over 120 departments and a $1.6 billion budget by ourselves on Microsoft Teams to put together performance reporting. But we need to also give time for these departments to be able to collect that data over the course of the year. And we had to use that year to just say, we can't just cut the lights on because we don't have the wiring set up, we don't have the infrastructure, we haven't talked to the contractors yet. And so they have particular time they need that time to be able to do that. What I will say is departments do have data, and some of them are producing it, and you are seeing it in myriads in different places, whether it's coming to policy. You'll see it in budget discussions as they use their performance frameworks, and Director Kerr has talked about that with departments as well, of utilizing performance frameworks. So it's not to say that you haven't seen that data, you just haven't seen it in a formalized product as we plan to hope to present to you all in 2023.
Thank you, and if I may, I appreciate the focus on strategic reporting. We need some general best practices types of reporting in the interim, and so this is maybe more of a message to departments individually than it is to your division in helping us to provide that. But can you help us just understand how did you make this decision to stop or to pause providing results? Because it has been a couple of years now.
Correct. So one of the first decisions made, and obviously wasn't one of the main decision makers in that decision, was we had a study from Johns Hopkins University. We can make sure we provide you with that research as well, that talked about some of the opportunities to improve results in the Minneapolis program. Also, Councilmember Payne did a improvement process evaluation with the last elected body that talked about recommendations for improvements to the results program. The next step was to report in 2020, and our plan then was to do metric selection in 2021. And our peers in the coordinator's office thought it would be best and had conversations, I believe, with some of the elected staff or elected officials formerly, that it would be best to really focus on working with departments than just focus on doing performance reporting and doing metric selection at the same time, along with a budget being developed. Thought that was a little bit of a burden at the time. And so for us, really the focus has been 2021 and 2022, getting ready for 2023 ultimately. And it was appropriate to focus on developing new metrics in 2021, and it was appropriate to give time for departments to collect that data for 2023. Instead of saying, you finished your metrics in December, you may not even have built the data collection modalities, but we want you to report on it. Some will develop proxies in the future if they still have struggles collecting that data. We just felt that it was appropriate time to give to departments to be successful in talking about that. And I still believe in my heart that they provided you all with quality information to make some sound policy decisions and programmatic decisions ultimately.
The John Hopkins study was in 2019?
No, it was in 2017.
It was in 2017. It's
Correct.
been a while.
Yes.
How do we help you better prioritize this work and finally get it back to where it left off?
Well,
or, in that better position?
Well,
because it's
personally,
been a while.
Our office doesn't need any help prioritizing. It's a top priority. However, we do need the priorities of having conversations with you all as colleagues to understand your needs for performance reporting, how you would like performance platform discussions to be set up. We need to talk, like I said, with race and equity, with IT, with budget to be aligned and how to develop the infrastructure. So we need the resources from them to make sure that we're successful in having planning conversations. And then we also know that a city this size, the type of work we do, when you talk about business analytics or data analytics, whichever ones you want to talk about at the time, you need the staffing, and we are a small shop. And so we can only do so much, so we'd have to be staffed up appropriately to be able to do work at a rapid pace if we were talking about major performance reporting in 2023 ultimately. But we can get there, we can put the infrastructure up, we can turn the lights on as much as possible, but can we put the china in the closet and the food on the table? Not exactly with how we're currently constructed, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Few more.
Oh, okay.
Hold on.
I'm
Thank
ready.
you.
There we go.
I have Councilmember Payne up next.
Okay.
Hello, Chair Koski. I just had a couple additions to some of the answers that Jonathan was giving that I want to mention. So one was there was a question about using our SREAP goals, some of the departments that aren't reflected in those, like Public Works, I think was a great example. How are those going to connect into this work? And I'll say in the budget book right now, we are using that performance framework that was a part of the slide from Jonathan's presentation, where we are asking each department to take a look at each of their programs. What are your mission? What are your goals and objectives? So the first part of that performance framework, that's reflected in our budget book right now. So I think Jonathan was describing the sort of bottom-up, top-down approach. SREAP goals, for some departments, they're not reflected in the policy goals selected in SREAP, but we are sort of doing that bottom-up work that for each program we're electing goals and missions that will lead into the performance framework model. And then just the other thing I wanted to talk about was timeline for Results Minneapolis. I think the decision was made to not move forward with Results Minneapolis in 2020. And I just wanted to remind that during the time when I think we normally would be hearing performance reporting in 2020, we were making urgent reductions to the budget as a result of the revenue crisis in the city. So I just want to kind of add that context to what the 2020 budget year looked like. In 21, we decided to formally move away, and in our financial policies, we took out reference to Results Minneapolis because we were a part of this transition to the new performance framework. So I just kind of wanted to contextualize that timeline in what was going on in the larger budget world in Minneapolis. So I just wanted to provide places where we were referenced just to give that context. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kruger. Appreciate it. Yes, Mr. Williams-Kinsel, if you could just hear a few more moments. We have Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the shout out, Jonathan. But really, this work, I know you've been working on it for at least 3 years, and you've probably been thinking about it for longer than that. And I really love the example you used around affordable housing for the transition from department reporting to strategic reporting. And I feel like very early in our conversations about this, we wouldn't have imagined that there was even an opportunity to, I mean, there's like an opportunity to even shift structurally our government to be more aligned with these outcomes rather than by department by department. So my question is, as you're thinking, and this is very early stages, right? Like to Vice President Palmisano's questions, I can sense an antsiness of like, okay, when do we get to see the new reporting? So if we were to project out some years from now, could this framework help guide the structure of our government so that as we are aligning our resources and our investments and our budget priorities, it's aligning towards outcomes rather than necessarily department by department?
Yeah, Councilmember Payne, yeah, you're correct. This framework has a number of potential use cases, and I can see very much this outcome-based work go into your strategic planning as well as a framework going forward. So you can see it from the top to the bottom, or the bottom is to the top, whichever way we kind of want to put it together as a team. So yeah.
Thank you. One more, we have Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair Koski. Hello, thank you for the presentation. I just had a quick question. So have you done like evaluation on 911, like on that department?
Councilmember Vita, our development of performance metric isn't about necessarily doing evaluation. We did develop performance metrics for the 911 office,
Okay.
so correct. But it's not where we go in and evaluate. We set up conversations with these departments and programs and really talk to them and say, hey, how are you? What is your program designed to do? What are you trying to change for the world, ultimately? And then we say, okay, how do you measure that? And we go through that conversation with them. What this will do for you ultimately to help, though, is start the conversations of evaluating your services. So if you want to talk about evaluating 911, you have a conversation because you're talking about how they're performing over time. And then you can start asking questions. I'm going back to the place where I'm saying where you could interrogate, explore, explain, and learn about how a program is actually functioning and what it actually needs to improve. And then you can make decisions on how to improve that work ultimately, whether that's resource related or some other decision.
So when you went in and did that, say, hey, how you doing? What is the, what is the long-term goal here? Like how, as a new council member, how can I find that? Like how, where is that in writing, or is that like a document that shows what they told you,
Yes.
and then like what you told? 911 is just the area of interest for me, right? Like it's something that I've been, as the chair of public health and safety, that I've really been following. So hearing this presentation, I'm just starting to think like, well, where, is this? How can I review this and see where they said they were, if you did this 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and then kind of where we are and how we support in the budget, whether it's on their side of the budget or your side of the budget, and getting them to those goals.
So short answer is, every single department that has done a performance framework, you can get it from a department. So if you contact 911 and ask them for their performance framework, they will provide you with a performance framework. There is a framework. It does not possess the data in there. They're not required to report in a formalized process that we haven't articulated yet to them until 2023. And so at the very least, you'll get the performance framework. But what you also get in the budget process is they will talk about performance in the budget process. So you will see performance data. You will also see elements of the performance frameworks within each department if they've used, each department's budget presentation, if they use their performance framework as requested by the budget office.
So if they used it in their, okay.
Yes.
Got it.
I'm not sure. I want to double check with you. I don't know if it was a requirement or not, but if it was, then they should. I'm sorry.
Oh, so it is, it's a requirement.
Not by me, but
Somebody.
yes.
So we, Chair Koski and members, we've asked each department to include sort of the first chunk of that performance framework, so the mission and then the goals. The data, as Jonathan mentioned, is the sort of unfinished portion of that. Many departments have that data. Many departments haven't started collecting it yet, so they're at different phases. I would encourage you to reach directly out to departments that you're interested in. When they come up and present, we've said include your performance framework and any data that you have. So hopefully we'll get sort of a real pulse check from departments on where they're at in collecting that information.
So any department, we should be able to do this. There is a level of measurement, and it should be a part of their budget presentations that they're including these performance measures in the future, like
Yeah.
the 23, 24, right?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Williams-Kendall. We have finished our questions for you, unless I see any others who have popped in here.
Yeah, actually, my boss, Director Smith.
Oh, sure, Director Smith, please.
Chair Koski, committee members, there's one, first of all, thank you, Jonathan, for the excellent presentation. I'm so happy to have the staff that I have doing what they do. They're really, really, really smart people. But there's one, Jonathan went about saying platforms and this, and, kind of a lot of intelligentsia. Well, I'm going to put it like old country folks would say, where the goats can get it, real low, real base. So the ask about the high-level intelligentsia you were hearing is actually an ask of this body. And the reason, although Results Minneapolis was not, it was a good attempt by the city, but it was not great performance management. It was not a great performance management tool. It was just the best we had at that time. But the reason why we were even able to get that information is because this body, along with our staff and along with the budget office, put together a joint letter that said this is what is required of departments so that we can make good budget and policy decisions as a council. So in order for us to move forward and we know the process that we use now has been vetted, it's scientific, it will work, but you won't get the quality of work and the quality of data and the quality of analysis that you likely require unless we do that joint effort again that we did with Vice President Palmisano back with the results when we wrote that joint letter that went out to all departments about what we expected around results reporting, a schedule to meet with budget and their analysts as well as OPI and our analysts to make those budget decisions. That is what's going to be required to have everybody participate in a meaningful way in this new results reporting. And so we're counting on, and the ask is we need this body to work with us, to work with budget, and making that request again around this new, more innovative and meaningful way of managing progress around the city. Otherwise, it's an ask from me, or it's an ask from Amelia, Director Kruger, and that does not carry the same weight as it does when there's a joint letter coming from the council, the mayor, and us together. So that's the ask, and that's the platform. That's what needs to be in place in order to get the compliance and the amount of data that you want to make informed decisions. And so that's the only ask that we have. And so now it's not all up here. We need you in order for us to be successful and the rest of the city.
Thank you. Oh, and I have Council Vice President Palmisano, and then another question here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Smith, since you were up at the podium, I do remember and I do appreciate outlining that with you back in, I think it was 2017, maybe it was 2016, about
I
what
was 17 or 18, I was my
what
first
we
year.
expect around results reporting. And I just want to make it really clear that since 2017, this body never said pause reporting of metrics around our city, right? So we are all about doing things more strategically, and in the interim, we need some kind of general best practices. So I need to know how we are going to be able to provide that through this budget process. I heard Mr. Williams-Kinzel talk about how departments are providing that work, and in general, that's what we have been using these past few years. And that's what it sounds like we will continue using. But nobody on this body made some broad decision to pause this work indefinitely, and I just want to make that really abundantly clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Oh, yep, go ahead.
Chair Koski, Vice President Palmisano. The Budget Office, which was Micah and Amelia at the time, myself and my team, Andrea Larson, and the former coordinator, Mark Ruff at the time, we all had conversations, including with Vice President Palmisano, who was then the chair of the Budget Committee, about that very process. And in that process, we said we're moving from the old results to the new results. And in doing so, we will have a year in which we will not be collecting data so that people could go to the new frameworks and then figure out how to collect that data. That decision was made with, and I know who was in the room, Director Kruger, former Director Ennemil, Andrea Larson, myself, and others. And that meeting also included talking with Vice President Palmisano, you, Vice President Palmisano, when we made that decision to pause on collecting old data so that we could prepare people for the new data. And so I don't want to go back and forth or tit for tat, but I just, that's what I recall. That's what I've talked to Director Kruger about and other staff members about, because that is exactly how we remember the process happening. And so if we somehow did not communicate that to you or have those conversations with you, it's like it's revealing to me, because that's, I think we're just remembering how that happened very differently.
I think the rest of this is a conversation we can take offline. I remember this much differently.
Okay.
Thank you. Council President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will pass my remarks and take them offline.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Smith, and thank you to everyone who spoke today. I just want everybody to know that I'm committed to working with all of you to continue to look at our performance management tools, and I'm looking forward to all the presentations that we have going forward as well. So, but before we adjourn today, I'd like to take this opportunity to review for both the public and my colleagues the anticipated timeline in which we will work to complete the city's 2023-2024 budget. The next step will be to receive presentations drilling down into the details of each department's proposed budget. We will begin these presentations at our next meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. and continue through the month of October. Council members have already received invites for all of these meetings, and the meetings have been noticed for the public on the city's Legislative Information Management System, LIMS. This committee has also scheduled a public hearing on the proposed budget on Thursday, November 10th at 10 a.m. This is in addition to 2 public hearings that will be held at meetings of the City Council on Tuesday, November 15th and Tuesday, December 6th. Both of those are at 6:05 p.m. And finally, I'll note that we'll consider amendments to the mayor's recommended budget at our meeting on December 1st and 2nd. These revisions will be forwarded to the City Council for final consideration at our last public hearing on December 6th. Again, that's at 6:05 p.m. And as I mentioned, the entire schedule is published on and posted in LIMS. And all of this information is also included. You got, all of my colleagues received this printed out version of our guide to our budget committee. So it's printed. It was also emailed to you today. Are there any other questions from my colleagues? With that, we've concluded all business to come before the committee today, and I'll note that our next meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m., where we will hear presentations from the city attorney, city auditor, and city clerk. And then we also have a meeting this Thursday, September 15th at 10 a.m. to hear presentations from the Office of Community Safety, 911, the Fire Department, and our emergency management teams. Seeing no further discussion and without objection, we stand to adjourn. Thank you.